The sun was just beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the sprawling campus of Crestview Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in town. Its towering gates, lined with ivy, seemed like an entrance to another world, a world Taylor had always dreamed of entering. Her palms were clammy as she adjusted her backpack on her shoulder and glanced nervously at her mother beside her. "Don't be nervous, sweetheart, you've got this," her mother Sarah reassured her, gently squeezing her hand. Sarah was always her source of strength, especially during moments like this. Taylor forced a smile, but the nerves twisting in her stomach made it difficult to feel confident. For months, she had worked tirelessly to prepare for this day. She had aced her entrance exams, participated in extracurricular activities, and even written a heartfelt essay about her dreams of studying at Crestview Academy. But as much as she had prepared, one thing gnawed at the back of her mind. Would they look past her accomplishments and only see her skin color? Crestview Academy was known for its excellence, but it was also whispered that the school had a long history of being selective about the kind of students they admitted. Taylor had heard the rumors, but she had convinced herself that times had changed, that her hard work and talent would be enough. As they approached the front desk, Taylor's nerves skyrocketed. The receptionist, an older woman with glasses perched at the end of her nose, looked up from her computer. Her eyes scanned Taylor, and there was a subtle but undeniable flicker of discomfort in her gaze before her polite smile returned. "Hello, welcome to Crestview Academy. How may I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone cordial but cold. "We're here for my daughter's admission interview," Sarah said confidently, flashing her own warm smile. The receptionist's smile faltered slightly, her fingers typing quickly across the keyboard. "Name, please?" "Taylor Johnson," Sarah answered for her daughter, who was suddenly feeling her throat tighten with nerves. The receptionist paused, her brow furrowing as she scanned the screen. The moments dragged on uncomfortably long. Finally, she looked up, her expression neutral. "I'm sorry, but there's no appointment scheduled under that name." Taylor's heart sank. "What? That can't be right," she stammered, her voice cracking slightly. Sarah's eyes narrowed, a hint of suspicion forming. "I personally scheduled this interview weeks ago. We received confirmation in writing." The receptionist's fingers tapped a few more keys. "I'm afraid there must have been some sort of mistake. We're fully booked for today, and we don't have any availability for new students." Taylor felt her mother stiffen beside her. "That's impossible. We followed all the procedures. My daughter is qualified." "There's no mistake," Sarah insisted, her voice taking on a sharper edge. Behind the receptionist, the door to the principal's office opened, and Principal Larson, a tall, middle-aged man with silver hair and a neatly pressed suit, stepped out. He glanced at the reception area, his eyes briefly landing on Taylor and Sarah, before he turned to the receptionist. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone polite but distant. The receptionist explained the situation in a low voice, and Taylor could feel the tension building. The principal glanced at Taylor again, his gaze lingering a little too long before he turned back to the receptionist. "Please inform them that we are at capacity for the year," he said, his words clipped and efficient. Taylor's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear. Her dreams of walking these halls, of being a part of this elite school, were evaporating before her eyes. "But sir," Sarah started, her voice tight with frustration, but the principal had already turned his back, disappearing into his office without another word. Taylor could feel the sting of tears forming in the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't cry here. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Her mother took a deep breath, her face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. I demand that we speak to someone else in charge. My daughter has every right to be here." The receptionist, now visibly uncomfortable, straightened her posture. "I'm sorry, but the decision is final. There are no more slots available for this academic year. Perhaps you could try again next year." Next year? Taylor's heart sank even further. She had done everything right. She had worked so hard, and yet here they were, being told they weren't good enough. But deep down, she knew this wasn't about her qualifications. This was about something she couldn't control. Something that shouldn't matter, but always seemed to. Sarah put her arm around Taylor's shoulder, pulling her close. "Come on, Taylor, we're leaving," she said quietly, her voice trembling with barely concealed fury. They turned and walked out of the school, the heavy iron gates closing behind them with a loud clank. Each step away from Crestview Academy felt like walking away from a dream, shattered by the weight of prejudice and discrimination. As they got into the car, Taylor finally let the tears spill down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking. Sarah turned to her, her eyes filled with sadness, but also fierce determination. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Taylor. You're brilliant, and no school, especially not one like that, can define your worth. We'll find another way." But Taylor wasn't sure. Sitting in the passenger seat, staring out the window as the school disappeared in the distance, she felt the heavy burden of rejection settling deep within her. It wasn't just about the school anymore. It was about the fact that no matter how hard she tried, there would always be people who would only see her skin color. The ride home was quiet, filled only with the hum of the engine and Taylor's racing thoughts. By the time they arrived at their house, Taylor had made up her mind. She would prove them wrong. She didn't know how yet, but she would. The house was unusually quiet that evening. Taylor sat in her room, her textbooks sprawled out on her desk, but she couldn't focus. The rejection from Crestview Academy kept replaying in her mind. The dismissive tone of the receptionist, the indifferent look in Principal Larson's eyes, it all felt so heavy. She closed her notebook in frustration, staring out of the window as the fading light of the day cast long shadows across the yard. She felt small and invisible, as though all her efforts had meant nothing. Downstairs, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the silence. Her father, Charles Johnson, had just returned from one of his long business trips. He was a man of few words, but always carried a calm authority. Despite being one of the wealthiest men in the city, Charles never flaunted his success. He kept his personal and professional lives separate, preferring to keep his family away from the public eye, where judgment and gossip often swirled. As he entered the house, the door creaked, and Taylor could hear the heavy sound of his footsteps as he placed his briefcase by the door. Her mother, Sarah, greeted him with a long sigh. She had been waiting for this moment to talk to him about what had happened at Crestview Academy. Charles hugged Sarah, sensing the tension. "Something wrong?" he asked in his usual measured tone. Sarah pulled back slightly, her face tired but determined. "It's Taylor. You won't believe what happened today at Crestview." Charles's brow furrowed, his calm expression giving way to concern. "What do you mean? Wasn't today her interview?" Sarah nodded, her voice trembling slightly as she explained the situation. "She never even got the chance to have it. They turned her away. They said they were fully booked, but I know it wasn't about that. It was because of who she is, because of what she looks like." Charles stood there silently for a moment, absorbing her words. His jaw clenched slightly as a wave of anger washed over him. He had encountered racism and prejudice many times in his life, but he had worked hard to protect his family from it. Hearing that his daughter had been humiliated in this way filled him with a deep, simmering fury. "How did Taylor take it?" he asked quietly, glancing up the stairs toward her room. Sarah shook her head. "She's devastated. She's been working so hard, and they just shut her out. She feels like it's her fault." Charles's anger deepened. He had built his wealth and success from the ground up, always believing that merit and effort should be the measures of a person's worth. But now, his own daughter was being judged by nothing more than her skin color. It wasn't just an insult to Taylor, it was an insult to everything he stood for. Without a word, Charles went upstairs. The door to Taylor's room was slightly ajar, and as he knocked softly, he heard her sniffle. "Taylor, can I come in?" She didn't answer, but he took the silence as permission and stepped inside. Taylor was sitting at her desk, her head bowed, eyes red from crying. "Hey, princess," he said gently, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Your mom told me what happened today." Taylor swallowed hard, fighting back the lump in her throat. "I'm sorry, Dad. I tried. I really did." Charles's heart ached. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Taylor. This wasn't your fault. It's them. They're the ones who made a mistake, one they'll regret." Taylor shook her head, her voice cracking. "But what if they're right? What if I'm just not good enough? Charles leaned forward, gently lifting her chin so she could meet his eyes. Taylor, listen to me. You are more than good enough. You've worked harder than anyone I know, and just because some people can't see that doesn't mean it isn't true. Sometimes, people will try to make you feel small because they're afraid of how bright you can shine, but that doesn't change who you are. Taylor wiped her eyes, her father's words offering some comfort, but the sting of rejection still lingered. I'll never let anyone make you feel like this again, Charles said firmly. I promise. He kissed her forehead before leaving her room, his mind already turning to the next steps. This wasn't something that could be fixed with kind words. It required action, and Charles was a man of action. Later that night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Charles made a series of phone calls. His network was vast, filled with influential people, legal experts, and business partners who owed him more than a few favors. He knew the exact financial state of Crestview Academy. What they didn't realize was that they were already in desperate need of funding. The school had been struggling quietly for years, trying to maintain its elite image while its finances crumbled. Charles decided he wouldn't just right the wrong done to his daughter, he would take control of the very institution that had turned her away. Sitting at his desk, Charles spoke to his lawyer, detailing the purchase he wanted to make. I want everything handled discreetly. They can't know it's me until the ink is dry. His lawyer, a sharp and efficient woman named Miranda, assured him that the process would be smooth. It's a smart move, she said. They won't see it coming. You'll have complete control before they even realize they're selling. Charles hung up the phone, a calm resolve settling over him. He wasn't just doing this for Taylor. He was doing it for every child who had ever been made to feel less than they were because of ignorance and prejudice. He leaned back in his chair, a small smile creeping onto his face. Crestview Academy had no idea what was coming. In the days that followed, the takeover proceeded swiftly. Charles kept everything under wraps, ensuring that the school's board members and administration had no inkling of his involvement. The school, eager for financial support, had no choice but to agree to the terms laid out by Charles's legal team. All the while, Taylor continued her routine, still unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. Sarah noticed her husband's unusual calm, but he said little about his late-night calls or the meetings he was attending. She trusted him, knowing that when Charles set his mind to something, he wouldn't rest until he succeeded. As the final papers were signed, Charles prepared for the moment when he would reveal himself to the people who had dismissed his daughter so casually. But for now, he stayed quiet, patiently waiting for the right time to strike. And when that time came, Crestview Academy would never be the same. The crisp morning air filled the halls of Crestview Academy as the day began like any other. Teachers were preparing their lessons, students shuffled to their classes, and the administration worked quietly behind their desks. Everything seemed as it always had, but no one realized that, behind the scenes, the very foundation of the school was about to shift drastically. In his office, Principal Larson sat comfortably reviewing student records for the upcoming school year. His thoughts briefly flickered to the Johnson family, particularly to the awkward situation that had occurred with their daughter, Taylor. He dismissed it as another routine decision where the school had maintained its standards. After all, Crestview had an image to uphold. In his mind, turning Taylor away wasn't personal. It was simply business as usual. Little did he know, the school's destiny was no longer in his hands. Across town, Charles Johnson sat in the sleek boardroom of his downtown office, surrounded by his legal and financial team. They were finalizing the final stages of Crestview Academy's acquisition, a transaction so discreet that not a single person on the school's board knew who the true buyer was. His lawyer, Miranda, meticulously went over the final paperwork, her voice steady and confident. "We're all set," Miranda said, flipping the last page of the contract. "The board has accepted the terms without a single question. As far as they know, they've secured a sizable investment from a silent partner." Charles leaned back in his chair, satisfaction spreading across his face. The acquisition had gone exactly as planned. The school, desperate for financial support, had practically begged for the deal without realizing that the very man they had humiliated was now in control. His identity had been kept hidden through layers of intermediaries, ensuring that the school's administration had no idea they were dealing with Taylor's father. Miranda closed the folder and slid it across the table toward him. "All we need now is your final approval, and the school is yours." Charles looked down at the document, his mind already turning to the next step. He had no intention of quietly owning the school. He wanted everyone, especially Principal Larson and the staff who had dismissed Taylor, to know exactly who was now in charge. "Let's move forward," Charles said calmly. "I want to meet with the board and the entire administration tomorrow. Everyone needs to be there." Miranda nodded. "I'll make the arrangements. They'll be in for quite a surprise." Charles sat in silence for a moment after Miranda left the room, staring at the contract. He thought of Taylor, how crushed she had been after the rejection, how she had questioned her own worth because of their actions. This wasn't just about taking control of Crestview Academy. It was about setting things right for her, for all the times people like Principal Larson had underestimated and dismissed those they deemed unworthy. He signed the contract and stood up, looking out the window at the bustling city below. Crestview Academy had no idea what was coming. The following morning, Crestview Academy's boardroom buzzed with excitement and anticipation. The staff and administration had been summoned for an urgent meeting with the school's new financial partner. Everyone was eager to meet the person behind the much-needed investment. Rumors had been swirling for weeks, but no one knew the true identity of the new benefactor. Principal Larson, oblivious to the impending storm, sat at the head of the table with a satisfied smile. He assumed the new investor would share the school's values of exclusivity and tradition. Crestview had always been selective, and he believed that this financial boost would allow them to continue to maintain their high standards. As the board members chatted among themselves, the doors to the room opened, and Charles Johnson entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. Charles walked to the front of the room, his expression calm but firm. Principal Larson's smile wavered as he slowly realized who was standing before him. "Mr. Johnson?" Larson said, his voice betraying his confusion. "What brings you here?" Charles locked eyes with the principal, his gaze cold and unflinching. "I'm here because, as of yesterday, I'm the new owner of Crestview Academy." The room erupted into stunned whispers. Board members exchanged confused glances, and Principal Larson's face turned pale. He stammered, trying to grasp what was happening. I don't understand." Charles stepped forward, placing the signed contract on the table. "You didn't think much of my daughter when she applied here. You didn't think she belonged in your precious school. But as of now, I own this school, and things are about to change." The weight of his words sank in, and the room fell into a tense silence. Principal Larson looked like he had been struck. "Mr. Johnson, I'm sure there's been some kind of mistake." "There's no mistake," Charles interrupted, his voice steady and sharp. "You refused my daughter, despite her qualifications, because of her skin color. But I'm not here to beg for her admission. I'm here to change the very way this school operates, starting with you." Larson's face drained of color. "Excuse me?" Charles remained calm, his expression unreadable. "You're fired. Effective immediately." A gasp echoed around the room as the gravity of the situation became clear. Principal Larson, once the gatekeeper of the school's strict and often discriminatory policies, was now being stripped of his position in front of the very people who had supported him. "You can't do this," Larson sputtered, his voice shaking. "I've been with this school for years. And that's part of the problem," Charles replied coldly. "People like you are the reason this institution has become a symbol of exclusion and prejudice. That ends today." As Larson fumbled for words, Charles turned his attention to the rest of the staff and board members. "There will be more changes in the coming days. Any member of this school who perpetuates discrimination or exclusion will no longer have a place here. Crestview Academy will no longer be a haven for the small-minded." Charles's words cut through the tension in the room like a blade. The staff, many of whom had aligned with Larson's traditionalist mindset, sat in stunned silence, realizing that the future of the school was now in the hands of someone who was determined to turn it upside down. Principal Larson rose shakily from his seat, his pride and arrogance shattered. He had no choice but to leave, his head hanging in defeat as he walked out of the room. Once he was gone, Charles turned back to the room. "I suggest you all start preparing for the changes to come," he said firmly. "This school is no longer the Crestview you once knew." As the meeting ended and the staff dispersed, Charles stood alone for a moment, breathing deeply. This was just the beginning. He wasn't just going to reshape Crestview Academy, he was going to ensure that no student, especially not his daughter, would ever be treated the way Taylor had been. The school was his now, and the real work was about to begin. Crestview Academy's campus seemed unusually quiet the next day, but inside the administrative offices, chaos was brewing. The news of Principal Larson's abrupt dismissal had spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the school. Staff members whispered anxiously in the hallways, unsure of what to expect next. Teachers, secretaries, and board members alike felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them. What kind of changes were coming? And who exactly was Charles Johnson? In the midst of this tension, Taylor Johnson was preparing for her first day at the school. She had no idea about her father's grand plan or the role he had played in the dramatic shift happening behind Crestview's pristine facade. To her, it was just another morning, albeit a heavy one, filled with the lingering sting of rejection and doubt. She still felt the burn of being turned away, of being told she didn't belong. "Taylor, you ready?" her mother, Sarah, called from downstairs. Taylor glanced at herself in the mirror, smoothing down her uniform, something she never imagined she'd wear for Crestview. It felt strange, like she was putting on a costume, pretending to fit into a place that had made it clear she wasn't welcome. But her father had insisted she attend today, and while she trusted him, she couldn't shake the knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I'm coming," she said softly, grabbing her backpack and heading downstairs. Her mother smiled encouragingly, but Taylor could see the concern in her eyes. "You're going to be great," Sarah said, pulling her into a quick hug. "This is just the beginning." Taylor nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She still didn't understand why her father had pushed so hard for her to attend after what had happened. Crestview Academy was the last place she wanted to be. Meanwhile, in the boardroom of Crestview Academy, the remaining staff and board members gathered, buzzing with nervous anticipation. They had been summoned once again, this time to meet the new owner in a more formal capacity. But many were still reeling from the shock of Principal Larson's departure. No one had expected Charles Johnson, the same man whose daughter had been denied admission, to now hold the reins of the entire institution. As the room filled, a mixture of apprehension and curiosity hung in the air. Some of the more senior staff members whispered to each other, their expressions tense, as if bracing for whatever was to come. "Do you think he's going to fire us all?" One whispered. "I don't know," another muttered back. "But if Larson's out, anything is possible." Just then, the door to the boardroom opened, and Charles Johnson walked in, his presence commanding immediate attention. The room fell silent as he made his way to the front, every eye locked on him. He placed a stack of documents on the table and looked around at the gathered staff and board members. "Good morning," Charles began, his voice calm but firm. "As you all know, there have been some significant changes here at Crestview Academy. I'm sure many of you are wondering what's next, so I wanted to take this opportunity to address you directly." He paused for a moment, letting his words sink in. "First, let me be clear about one thing. I did not buy this school to maintain the status quo. Crestview Academy will no longer be a place where discrimination, exclusion, or elitism are tolerated. That era is over." Murmurs rippled through the room, but no one dared speak out. Charles's gaze swept across the faces of the staff, landing briefly on each one. "I know many of you were loyal to Principal Larson and his vision for this school, but Crestview has lost its way. What was once an institution of learning has become a symbol of exclusivity, where the color of a student's skin or the wealth of their family determines their value. That stops now." A sharp intake of breath could be heard from one of the board members, but still, no one spoke. "I'm here to rebuild this school into something better," Charles continued. A place where students are judged by their character and their abilities, not by their background or race. And to do that, I need a team that shares that vision. He paused, letting the tension build before delivering the next blow. There will be changes, big changes. Some of you may not have a place here anymore. But those who are willing to embrace this new vision, who believe in equality and inclusivity, will have the opportunity to help me turn this school into a beacon of progress. One of the senior teachers, a man named Mr. Spencer, cleared his throat and finally spoke. Mr. Johnson, with all due respect, this school has been operating in a certain way for a long time. Change is difficult. I'm not sure how the community will react to all of this. Charles's expression didn't waver. Mr. Spencer, change is only difficult for those who resist it. The community may push back at first, but that's only because they've become accustomed to a system that benefits the few and excludes the many. We're going to change that, and if anyone is uncomfortable with that, they're free to leave. Mr. Spencer sat back in his chair, clearly unsettled by the shift in power. Before anyone else could voice their concerns, Charles turned his attention to the final matter of the day. One more thing, he said, his tone hardening slightly. As of today, my daughter, Taylor Johnson, will be attending this school. She is more than qualified to be here, and she will be treated with the same respect and opportunity as any other student. If anyone has a problem with that, I suggest you reconsider your place here. The room fell into a stunned silence. The message was clear. Charles was not just here to reform the school. He was here to ensure that his daughter and every other student like her would be given the chance they deserved. That afternoon, Taylor arrived at Crestview Academy, feeling a strange mixture of dread and curiosity. She knew something had happened, but she didn't yet know the full extent of her father's actions. As she walked through the gates, she could feel the stares of other students. Whispers followed her through the hallways, but no one said anything to her face. At the front of the school, Charles stood waiting for her. As she approached, he smiled warmly, pulling her into a hug. I know you're nervous, he said softly, but you belong here, Taylor. Don't ever forget that. Taylor looked up at her father, still unsure of what had changed, but something about the way he spoke made her feel a sense of pride she hadn't expected. She nodded slowly, her resolve strengthening. Charles walked her to the entrance, his hand on her shoulder as they moved past the watchful eyes of the staff and students alike. When they reached the doors, he stopped, turning to face her. This is your school now too, he said with a smile. No one will ever tell you otherwise again. Taylor took a deep breath and stepped through the doors, ready to begin a new chapter in a school that was no longer controlled by those who had tried to keep her out. Inside, the whispers grew louder, but Taylor held her head high. She wasn't just walking into Crestview Academy, she was walking into a future where she and others like her could finally claim their rightful place. In the days following Taylor's first day at Crestview Academy, the school was buzzing with rumors and uncertainty. Word of the new ownership and Principal Larson's swift dismissal spread through the student body and faculty like wildfire. There were whispers in the halls, quiet discussions behind closed doors, and uneasy glances exchanged between staff members. Change was clearly coming, but no one quite knew how deep those changes would go. For Taylor, walking through the halls of Crestview felt like being caught between two worlds. On one hand, she felt a sense of justice, knowing that the school that had once turned her away was now hers to attend without fear of rejection. But on the other hand, the lingering tension from the staff and some students made it clear that not everyone welcomed her presence. The older students, especially those from wealthy, established families, seemed to look at her with disdain, as if she were a symbol of the school's downfall in their eyes. But Taylor was determined not to let it get to her. She had endured the pain of rejection once, and she wasn't about to let the cold stares or whispered insults stop her now. She walked through the halls with her head held high, her father's words echoing in her mind. You belong here. In the administrative offices, however, the changes were happening much faster than anyone had anticipated. Charles Johnson wasted no time in implementing his new vision for the school. With Principal Larson gone, he appointed a new interim head of the school, a respected educator named Dr. Laura Jacobs, who had a reputation for advocating inclusivity and diversity in education. Dr. Jacobs wasted no time getting to work. In her first meeting with the faculty, she laid out the new policies that would guide Crestview moving forward. The staff listened, some with apprehension, others with relief, as she outlined the changes that would reshape the very fabric of the school's culture. Crestview Academy is no longer a place where students are judged by their backgrounds, their wealth, or the color of their skin, Dr. Jacobs said, her voice firm but warm. We are going to create an environment where every student has an equal opportunity to succeed, where every teacher is held to the highest standard of fairness and excellence. If any of you feel that you cannot align with this vision, then I encourage you to reconsider your place here. A few staff members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one dared to speak out. They knew that Charles Johnson's influence was powerful, and with Dr. Jacobs at the helm, they were facing a new era for the school, whether they liked it or not. The first major change came in the form of a complete overhaul of the school's admissions policies. Dr. Jacobs and her new admissions team worked tirelessly to ensure that the application process would be more inclusive, welcoming students from all walks of life, not just those from wealthy or influential families. Scholarships were expanded, and outreach programs were developed to recruit talented students from underrepresented communities. Charles made it clear that his vision for Crestview wasn't just about money or prestige. It was about creating a legacy of opportunity and fairness. And as word spread about the school's new direction, something remarkable began to happen. Families who had once been excluded from the halls of Crestview started applying. Students from diverse backgrounds who had never dreamed of attending such a prestigious school were now being welcomed with open arms. However, not everyone was pleased with the changes. A small but vocal group of parents, most of whom were from the wealthiest families in town, began to push back. They didn't like the idea of Crestview Academy being opened up to students who didn't fit the traditional mold. For years, they had viewed Crestview as a place where their children could mingle with others from equally affluent families, a place where status mattered as much as education. A group of these parents organized a meeting with the school's board, demanding answers. They were led by a man named Mr. Harrison, one of the most influential figures in the town, whose family had attended Crestview for generations. He had been one of Principal Larson's staunchest supporters and was deeply unhappy about the direction the school was taking. "This is unacceptable," Mr. Harrison fumed during the meeting. "Crestview has always been a place of tradition, excellence, and exclusivity. You can't just open the doors to anyone and expect it to maintain its reputation." Charles was present at the meeting, and he listened to the complaints with calm detachment. When Mr. Harrison finished his tirade, Charles stood up and addressed the room. "Mr. Harrison, I understand your concerns," Charles began, his voice steady and controlled. "But what you're describing is a Crestview that no longer exists. Tradition and excellence are important, but not at the expense of fairness and opportunity. This school will still be a place of excellence, perhaps even more so than before, but it will also be a place where every student, regardless of their background, has a chance to thrive." The tension in the room was palpable, but Charles's authority was undeniable. Mr. Harrison, though still fuming, had no choice but to sit down. The rest of the board members nodded in agreement, understanding that Charles was not a man who could be swayed by wealth or power. His vision for Crestview would move forward, whether they liked it or not. As the school year progressed, the transformation of Crestview Academy became more and more visible. New students, from a variety of backgrounds, began to fill the classrooms. The old cliques of wealth and privilege slowly started to dissolve as students were encouraged to collaborate, learn, and grow together, regardless of their differences. Taylor, though still facing some resistance from a few of the older students, found herself becoming part of this new wave of change. She made friends with students who, like her, had once felt out of place in such an elite environment. Together, they began to form a new community within the school, one that was defined not by status, but by mutual respect and shared experiences. But change, as always, came with challenges. There were still teachers who clung to the old ways, still students who resisted the integration of new ideas and new people. Taylor herself experienced moments of doubt and isolation, but each time she felt the weight of those challenges, she remembered her father's determination. She wasn't just a student at Crestview, she was part of something bigger, something that would change the school forever. One afternoon, Taylor was called to the front of the school for a special event. Her father, Charles, stood at the podium, surrounded by students and faculty. Dr. Jacobs was beside him, beaming with pride. The crowd murmured in curiosity as they gathered to hear the announcement. Charles stepped up to the microphone. "Today marks the beginning of a new era for Crestview Academy," he said, his voice strong and filled with conviction. "This school will be a beacon of opportunity, a place where every student, no matter where they come from, has the chance to succeed. And to symbolize that change, we are proud to announce the launch of the Crestview Academy Scholarship Program." The crowd erupted into applause, and Taylor felt a surge of pride swell in her chest. Her father had done it. He had transformed the very institution that had once rejected her into a place of inclusion, fairness, and excellence. As the applause died down, Charles turned to Taylor and smiled. "This is just the beginning," he said quietly to her. "Together, we're going to build something that lasts." Taylor looked around at the students and staff gathered around them, realizing that her father's vision wasn't just about fixing the past. It was about creating a future where every student had a place. She wasn't just attending Crestview Academy, she was helping to shape its legacy. And for the first time, Taylor felt like she truly belonged. Months passed, and the changes at Crestview Academy continued to unfold, much to the surprise of both critics and supporters. The school's transformation had taken root, and the atmosphere had become more open, inclusive, and dynamic. Students who once felt out of place now thrived in an environment that celebrated diversity, and even some of the more skeptical teachers had begun to adapt to the new direction set by Charles Johnson and Dr. Laura Jacobs. For Taylor, life at Crestview was still an adjustment. While many of her classmates had warmed to the new culture of inclusivity, there were still pockets of resistance. A small group of wealthy students, led by none other than Mr. Harrison's son, Ethan, continued to make snide remarks behind her back. But Taylor no longer felt the sting of their words. With each passing day, she gained more confidence, knowing that she wasn't alone in this journey. She was part of something much bigger than herself, part of a legacy her father had created, and she was determined to see it through. One afternoon, as the school year was nearing its end, Dr. Jacobs called a special assembly. The students gathered in the auditorium, murmuring in curiosity about what the occasion could be. Taylor sat with her friends, feeling a strange sense of anticipation in the air. On the stage, Charles stood beside Dr. Jacobs, waiting for the room to quiet down. Once everyone had settled, Dr. Jacobs stepped up to the microphone. "Today, we are here to recognize the incredible progress this school has made over the past year," she began, her voice filled with pride. "Crestview Academy is no longer just an institution of tradition. It's a place of opportunity. And I am proud to announce that this year, we have our first round of scholarship recipients, students who have shown not only academic excellence, but also a commitment to making this school and the world a better place." The room broke into applause, and Charles stepped forward to continue the announcement. "This year, we are awarding scholarships to students who embody the spirit of Crestview's new vision. Students who have overcome challenges, embraced diversity, and worked tirelessly to excel. I'm pleased to announce that one of those students is my daughter, Taylor Johnson." Taylor froze, her heart pounding as the room erupted into cheers and applause. She hadn't expected this. Her father had never mentioned anything about her being a scholarship recipient. She stood up slowly, feeling her friends nudging her forward with smiles of encouragement. Her legs felt like jelly as she made her way to the stage. As she approached her father, she could see the pride in his eyes. He handed her a certificate, and when she looked out at the crowd, all of the uncertainty she had carried for so long melted away. This wasn't just a school anymore. It wasn't just a place that had once rejected her. It was a symbol of everything she and her father had fought for. Charles hugged her tightly before whispering, "You earned this, Taylor. Never forget that." She nodded, blinking back tears as she stepped back to allow the other recipients to be announced. For the first time since she had walked through Crestview's gates, she felt like she truly belonged. The scholarship ceremony was just the beginning of the celebration. That evening, Crestview Academy hosted a community event to highlight the school's new direction. Parents, students, alumni, and faculty mingled on the sprawling grounds of the school, enjoying the festivities. There were speeches, performances by students, and even a ribbon-cutting ceremony for the newly established Crestview Academy Community Center, a space designed for outreach programs and student-led initiatives. As the sun set and the event continued into the evening, Taylor wandered off to a quiet corner of the campus, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short amount of time. She had gone from being a rejected applicant to standing at the center of a transformed school. She had struggled, doubted herself, and faced challenges, but through it all, she had grown stronger. As she stood under the old oak tree near the edge of the grounds, Charles found her, his hands in his pockets as he approached. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Taylor smiled and shook her head. "Of course not." They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the lights from the event twinkle in the distance. "You know, when we first started this journey, I wasn't sure how it would turn out," Charles admitted. "But seeing you here, seeing what this school has become, I know it was all worth it." Taylor turned to him, her eyes soft. "It wasn't just you, Dad. You did this for me. For all of us." Charles smiled, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. "I did, but you're the reason it worked. You showed everyone that you belonged here. And now this school is better because of it." Taylor felt a swell of emotion rise in her chest. "It's not just me," she said. "There are so many other students who needed this change too. It's about all of us." Charles nodded, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And that's why it's going to last. Because it's not just about one person. It's about creating something bigger than ourselves." They stood together, watching as the community mingled and celebrated, the sound of laughter and conversation filling the night air. As the school year came to a close, Crestview Academy's transformation became a model for other schools in the area. Word spread about the success of the new admissions policies, the scholarship program, and the inclusive environment that had been fostered under Charles Johnson's leadership. Other institutions began reaching out, asking for guidance on how to implement similar changes. The story of Crestview's rise from exclusivity to inclusivity became a beacon of hope for schools everywhere. For Taylor, her journey at Crestview had only just begun. She still faced challenges. There were still whispers and lingering doubts from a few, but she knew that she had earned her place. And more importantly, she knew that she was part of a movement that would continue to grow, even after she had graduated. As she walked across the stage at her graduation, the applause from her classmates, teachers, and her father filled the auditorium. The girl who had once doubted herself, who had questioned whether she belonged, was now leading the way for others to follow. Crestview Academy had become more than just a school. It had become a legacy, a place where students from all walks of life could find their voice, their strength, and their future. And Taylor Johnson, once rejected, had become its proudest symbol.